Joining us, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rhodes, staff writer for The New Yorker Susan Glasser, and staff writer for The Atlantic and MS Now political contributor Mark Leibovich. If the Republicans are going to vote to authorize this war, if they support the president, they believe the majority of the party supports the president, David, why not just have a war powers resolution? Why not get an authorization from Congress? Why not demand it?
I guess I just think that privately Republicans understand how unpopular this war is. And the president keeps trying to explain this away, saying everything's going great. And, saying again, as he did this afternoon, that the Iranian's Navy is, at the bottom of the sea. But it's not. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Experts I've talked to have said that Iran can withstand this American blockade into May, if not beyond that. And so this continues to not go well. And I just think Republicans are just trying to vote they're trying to somehow not anger Donald Trump and avoid as many votes as possible that alienate their voters. And I don't see how that works.
So today on the White House lawn, as the president was going down to Florida to the villages, he was asked about going to Congress for an authorization. And he said, Susan, other countries don't have to do this. He also said the Iran war is going so well and he's got to stop them from having a nuclear weapon. He just sent a letter to both houses of Congress saying that he's not going to come to Congress. I was struck, though, by him saying other countries don't have to do this. We're not other countries.
Well, first of all, that's not entirely accurate. I don't think Donald Trump is an expert on our own Constitution, never mind the principles that shape the constitutions of our allies in France or Germany or, other countries around the world, where, in fact, there's a strong correlation between what the legislature authorizes and what the leader of the country is allowed to do. Here's the thing. OK, first of all, there's the enormous cost that is growing by the minute of this conflict. That's where Congress ultimately is going to have to take a vote, whether it says it wants to overall authorize the war or not. The price tag is already, according to the Pentagon, more than $25 billion. Many people believe that, in fact, that's an understatement, that actually the true cost of the war already is well over $30 billion, Katie, and who knows how long the American stepped-up presence in the Middle East will have to last. Congress ultimately will be forced to take votes on authorizing more funding to allow the military to have this presence in the Middle East. So that's number one. They will be forced to take that vote. It's very unpopular. It will be a hard vote for them to take. But as far as the broader war powers thing, this is unfortunately a trend that's gone on for decades, going back to the 1970s. The difference is that in other conflicts that turned sour on American presidents, there had been a vote, at least by Congress, on the front end to authorize American military force. And that included both George W. Bush's war, a preemptive invasion of Iraq in 2003, and the war that his father, George H.W. Bush, launched in 1991.
David, there's that comparison. There's also the one, Mark, that I just made at the top of the show about Vietnam. It's just striking to see that this war is more unpopular right now than the war in Vietnam was. And that ended a presidency.
Yeah, obviously that is kind of ancient history as far as the information environment they were operating in the 60s compared to now. Also, it was a very different political reality in which Lyndon Johnson was actually very much attuned to what his own party was abiding, what the other party was abiding, what the American public was abiding. Donald Trump seems to be operating in an environment where he seems just really blissfully indifferent to any kind of not just checks and balances, but even perceptions that he might be acting in an unhinged manner. I think Donald Trump at this point, just seems to, the aloneness that he proceeded to this war with, not going to Congress, not consulting any allies, has very much been the MO in which the whole war has been prosecuted around the whims of one very capricious president. And I think that's very frustrating to Republicans, but obviously they have not empowered themselves to say anything about it.
What do you make of this White House official account, Susan, posting this image? We'll show it. Two kings with a crown emoji. Is this just the president trolling the American public?
Well, it's yes. Short answer, yes. Slightly less short answer, Katie, is that they posted that image in the middle of the king's speech to Congress, in which the biggest applause line, as you noted, was King Charles III of Great Britain, the fourth great-grandson of George III, who lost the Revolutionary War, lecturing Americans about how to run a democracy, bringing members of Congress to their feet at the mere mention of the Magna Carta and the idea of checks and balances. And so I think what's notable is that Donald Trump, he's an irony-free zone, right? He uses the king emoji and he thinks it's great and that, that's what he aspires to be. At the same time, his approval ratings, I think, are cratering because he's taking so many unilateral, heavy-handed actions. Americans, even many Republicans and independents who voted for Donald Trump, don't want to be governed by a king. And I think that debate is sort of coming to a head in this sort of bizarre, upside down, Alice in Wonderland kind of a way in the 250th anniversary of the American experiment, to have the king come here from London and basically have to school us on our own principles of democracy.
Why don't we play that soundbite? It was a good moment.
The U.S. Supreme Court Historical Society has calculated that Magna Carta is cited in at least 160 Supreme Court cases since 1789, not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances.
Yeah, the irony of having a king come here, as Susan was saying, and lecturing us on our own democracy. I wonder if the White House is just so dangerously out of touch on this. I mean, they might think that they're trolling the libs with the two kings emoji mark, but when you talk to Americans, you do focus groups, we stop people on the street, or you poll them, they keep bringing up the ballroom and Donald Trump's feeling that he can do anything, and his focus on the gilded space of the White House he's trying to build, on these monuments that he's building, on taking care of his rich friends. And underneath that is the implication that they don't like that he's acting like a king. And it's not just liberals. It's independents, Republican-leaning independents, who are uncomfortable, Americans who are struggling at the gas pump, where gas is, more than a dollar more a gallon in many places in this country.
Yeah, I mean, the ostentatious fetishizing of the president's likeness, whether it's on the side of federal buildings in Washington or stamped on a passport or on a coin or something like that, I mean, that is fundamentally antithetical to the America that most Americans define and being part of what they see the presidency as. And the irony of this, or really the sort of really sad thing about this, is that the essence of conservatism and a lot of republicanism over the years has been to check executive power to this degree. It is a people's office. It is small government. It is decentralized government. And I mean, every time Donald Trump does something to this effect or posts something about two kings or whatever, it is flouting it to a degree that is really kind of mocking of the people who are abiding it, which is his own party.
Usually there's politics that would restrain somebody. I mean, in the last term, the idea of getting reelected put some constraints around Donald Trump. His advisors would be able to go to him and say, if you do this, people are not going to vote for you again. He's not on the ballot again. How much is the prospect of losing the midterms restraining him?
Yeah, it seems to be not at all. I think, there are probably a lot of people close to him who are concerned that he just doesn't care about this because it doesn't affect him specifically. I mean, he's still going to be in office. Voters don't get to vote on him anymore. But obviously the Republicans on the Hill have to worry about this because this means their jobs, and they're obviously not happy about it. But I also think that I think you get a sense that his legislative allies and certainly his staff in the White House and his people in administration seem completely helpless at affecting his way of thinking in any way, and have probably at a certain point just sort of thrown their hands up.
But if they are worried about losing their jobs because of Donald Trump's actions, why are they still lashing themselves so closely to Donald Trump, Susan?
Well, Katie, that's a good question. In fact, you could argue that that is the enduring question of the last decade of American political life. Is a Republican Party that has chained itself to Donald Trump at times very much against the perceived self-interest of many of its individuals. Number one, we're still in the primary season. And because of gerrymandering and because of the way in which Trump controls so much, essentially, political patronage now, the fundraising machine, things like that have been sort of outsourced to him and those around him. It means that Republicans still are dependent on Donald Trump to win primaries that often determine who actually wins the seat. So that's first of all. So you got to wait and see maybe a few more months after there are more primaries and looking to the general election whether Republicans start to break more clearly. I don't think that's going to happen. But one effect here is the kind of distortion of our political playing field. And I wouldn't underestimate that. And then Donald Trump really just doesn't care. I mean, that's the other thing. Mark made this point. He's untethering himself from the constraints of public opinion. And I think he's escalating his actions day by day. That's a dynamic that really could be with us for the next 2.5 years remaining of his presidency.